week 14, the last week of the introduction to the culture of the 19th century. And today I'd like to talk with you about the closing of the long 19th century, that is the Edwardian period, more or less being the period of the reign of the successor of Queen Victoria, namely King Edward VII. Before we start talking about this period, a few recommendations for the documentaries. Again, there are quite a few interesting documentaries to watch if you're interested, if you would like to know more, if you'd like to see the visual materials illustrating this subject. So the first documentary I would like to recommend to you is the BBC documentary. Actually, it consists of 6 episodes, but only the first one is about the Edwardian period. The title is The Making of Modern Britain. The Making of Modern Britain by Andrew Marr. He is a well-known political commentator from the BBC, and the whole documentary series is about the history and culture of Great Britain in the first half of the 20th century. So of course the first episode is about the first decade, that is the Edwardian period. So that's the first one. And another documentary which you might find interesting is entitled Britain in 1900. Britain in 1900. So again, it's a documentary about the state of the United Kingdom at the point of Queen Victoria's death. So the beginning of the 20th century. Queen Victoria, as you hopefully remember, died on the 22nd of January 1901. So actually, incidentally, we have an anniversary today, which is also my birthday for some strange reason. Her successor on the throne was her eldest son, her second child, the former Prince of Wales. His given name was Albert Edward, but when he came to the throne he decided to use the name Edward VII. So he was probably the longest serving Prince of Wales, with the exception of the current Prince of Wales, and he really waited for a long time. He was in his late 50s when he finally came to the throne, and he didn't really stay on the throne for a very long time, because he was dead in May 1910, so less than 10 years of reign altogether. He was a heavy smoker, and eventually he died of cancer, so as might be expected, unfortunately. As far as King Edward VII is concerned, he was a completely different character than Queen Victoria was. Closer, as you might expect, to Victoria's predecessors, the Hanoverian wicked uncles. He was also quite similar to them physically, not very tall, quite overweight, with this kind of round, jovial face. And he was well liked, surprisingly. The population, the public opinion in general was basically tired with the decades of Victorian morality, with the 4 decades long mourning of Queen Victoria after the death of Prince Albert. They wanted a monarch who was more approachable, who was more visible, who would engage in some sort of public celebrations and would be closer to the people. And Edward VII was exactly such character. Those who knew him, and we know from the biographies that he was sociable, he was usually good-humored, he liked all the pleasures of life, very much like those wicked uncles George IV and William IV. He was a gourmet, he liked food and wine and cigarettes and cigars. He also liked the company of women. He was quite notorious for his many liaisons with society beauties, aristocratic ladies, actresses, whatever. Some say that he was a frequent client of some exclusive brothels in Paris, that he would travel to Paris for some sort of short pleasure trips, and had some favorite companions there as well. His wife was Princess Alexandra of Denmark, who was chosen for her physical beauty when the decisions were made about the future marriage. Victoria and Albert knew about potential problems with keeping the morality on the part of the Prince of Wales, and they believed that finding the most beautiful Protestant princess in Europe would solve the problem. It didn't, or at least not for long. But Princess and later Queen Alexandra was also well respected. She was a kind of calm and you might even say long-suffering wife. To the king, she never objected, although of course she knew about the other women. So much so that apparently when he lay dying, finally on his deathbed, she allowed one of his favorite mistresses, Alice Keppel, who is some great aunt of Camilla, the wife of the present Prince of Wales. So she allowed Alice Keppel to visit the dying king. So we have this new climate, much more sociable and pleasure-seeking. The king would socialize a lot, not only with the aristocracy. This is something that he was quite praised for by the media, by the newspapers, for example, that among his friends were people like upper middle class businessmen, like for example Thomas Lipton, the tea merchant. Lipton tea is named after him. So generally, when we talk about the Edwardian period, for many historians and historians of culture especially, this is the kind of golden twilight of the Victorian era. The period of beautiful clothes, of wealth and complacency and luxury, and this was a good time to be alive if you were rich, or at least in the middle class and upwards. It is also sometimes referred to as the golden age of childhood. It was a wonderful moment in history to be a child. If you were, of course, a rich child from a rich family, if you look at the range of merchandise available to parents of children and for children, the clothes, the toys, the beautifully illustrated books, this is all very evident and very wide range of such products are available in the Edwardian period. So all kinds of luxuries in life. We have luxurious foods and parties and restaurants. We have all kinds of fashionable city pleasures, including some kinds of shows and theatrical performances, especially the music hall. I think I mentioned the music hall already, so this kind of variety show with funny sketches and songs and trained animals and whatever else you might find entertaining. So this is something that's very visible. The luxury, the pleasures, the comfort, and it's all becoming more and more democratic. It's all becoming more and more available also to the broader spectrum of the society, including, of course, the middle class, the middle class even. So you do not have to be an aristocrat or an extremely rich industrialist to enjoy all the pleasures of life. So the Edwardian period is usually remembered as this brief, bright moment of luxury and pleasure headed by a man who was sometimes nicknamed, a bit maliciously, Edward the Caresser, because of his many mistresses and his love of women. Quite a lot of things happen in the city. So if we compare the urban life, let's say at the beginning of the 19th century, in the Regency period, then through the long reign of Queen Victoria to the reign of King Edward VII, we can observe tremendous progress in the availability of all kinds of comforts and pleasures of city life. We have what you might easily recognize as modern cities, with some new inventions like electricity gaining popularity. Although electricity was known in the late 19th century, it was not really popular in private homes, and it's still not popular in private homes in the Edwardian period, but more and more businesses, offices, headquarters of businesses, headquarters of newspapers, theaters, they start installing electric lights, so everything is bright and beautiful. You have the very beginning of the cinema, of course silent cinema, but this is a wonderful new novelty, and the Edwardians, just like the Victorians before them, they love everything that is modern and involves new technologies, and for them it's very, very exciting. With the beginning of the cinema, we have the beginning of the globalized culture. We have international movie stars, some of them originally British, like Charlie Chaplin, who had a fairly good theatrical and music hall career in Britain before he decided to go to the United States, and he became a famous film actor. If you had a cinema in your vicinity, and the cinemas were basically mushrooming all over Edwardian cities, you could go, and for a fraction of the ticket price to go to the theater, you could see the newest, most fashionable and popular productions involving internationally famous stars. So this is something completely new. This is really the beginning of the modern phenomenon of global culture, and the beginning of the cultural domination of the United States that will be further strengthened by the involvement of the United States in the First World War. This is something that happens in the city centers. Another thing that happens to the cities is the growth of the suburbs. The suburbia, so the outskirts of the cities, grow tremendously. At the beginning of the 20th century, we have huge modern residential districts all around the cities, and the middle class starts moving away from the city center to the suburbs. So they want more comfort in life. They want to have their own little houses with gardens, with some access to the natural surroundings. We have either the small detached houses or very typical early 20th century semi-detached houses that become the kind of default accommodation for the middle class, for the urban middle class. One reason why this is possible is a very reliable and cheap system of public transport in the city, including, of course, the underground, which by the end of the 19th century has developed into a very broad system, so you can reach all places in the city and beyond the city center with the underground. We have the system of buses and trams in some cities, although London never had trams. And we have the system of railways, the subway railways, the railways that would cater for the commuters going between the workplaces in the city center and the residential quarters in the suburbs. So you do not have to have a private means of transport to be able to travel fairly long distance every day reliably to and from work. With the extensive railway system, this is possible. This is very cheap and reliable. So the middle class start to abandon the more crowded conditions and more expensive living conditions in the city center and move to the suburbs, where they inhabit those tiny little houses, and it's basically a different lifestyle that starts to develop, with the wives spending time at home in the local neighborhood, using local shops, families using local entertainment centers like the cinemas that were very often in the suburbs. And the city center becomes either the place of work or the place inhabited by either the very rich, who had large and comfortable and even luxurious accommodation in the city center with gardens and detached houses and everything all along, so they didn't really need to move anywhere because they could afford to continue living in the city center, or the very poor who wouldn't be able to afford the ticket prices for regular commuting, or they could not afford to move to the semi-detached or even terraced houses outside of the city center. So the middle section of the society basically moves out of the city center, and mostly men go to work. I say the lifestyle changes, and this is also visible if you compare the most typical middle class family life in the Victorian period and then in the Edwardian period. There are some visible changes. So first of all, we have more technologies at home. So all the novelties such as refrigerators and all kinds of machines that make life a bit easier with cleaning, with cooking. They start to gain popularity in private homes. And they start to replace the need for servants. Servants are a luxury that less families can afford in the suburbs. Also, the houses in the suburbs are usually quite manageable to be cleaned with the help of just the housewife or housewife and perhaps one servant to help her, without the need of many servants continuously living with the family. So we have the situation that servants come to help with cleaning, washing, and other household chores, but the day-to-day maintenance is done by the wife, the lady of the house herself. Another thing that happens is that there are more employment opportunities also for the working class people, especially working class women, who would before very often consider becoming domestic servants, at least for some time in their youth. Now they can get better jobs. They can work in industry, they can work in services, they can have proper contracts with very clearly specified rules and conditions with the vacation and the conditions of work in anything more, let's say, formalized and organized than being a domestic servant left at the mercy of your employer, results in the fact that many working class young people do not even think of becoming domestic servants because they have other opportunities. Another visible change in the family life and the family structure in the Edwardian period is the limitation of the number of children. If you remember, in the middle of the century, the average number of children in the family, in the Victorian family, was around 5 or 6 children. In the Edwardian period, this goes down to around 3. So the average number of children in the Edwardian period is 3. It's quite interesting because they do not have the effective contraception yet, but there is a growing awareness that among the wealthy classes that children are an investment. So you should focus on the quality rather than the quantity. More and more children survive. The death in childhood becomes not something that you need to consider when you start a family. So you do not really expect some of your children not to reach adulthood, but you expect all of your children, including daughters, to be able to get education and some sort of higher standard of living, including, I don't know, clothing and leisure activities and sports and some extra skills they might be learning, like playing a musical instrument or dancing or foreign languages or some other social skills. Also, there are more and more opportunities for women from the middle class upwards to get employment, not really because of the financial situation of the family, so they would need to contribute to the family budget, but because they would like to have some money of their own. We have a new way of thinking. Well, this is the new women, or even the daughters of the new women. So what you might today call, with some reservations, early feminists. The Edwardian period is also the time of the suffragettes. it starts in the 90s, but at the turn of the century we have a massive social movement aimed at getting the voting right for women, and many women from different social classes take part in the demonstrations, in the marches, sometimes even in more radical actions such as chaining themselves to public buildings, or even something more dramatic and controversial, such as destroying letters in post boxes or destroying works of art in museums to draw attention to the question of women's rights. Of course, they did not get it before the First World War. The voting right was given to British women only in 1918, so after the First World War, but it took a few long decades of heavy campaigning to ever consider this thing. So one of the visible things in the Edwardian period is the women's question, the movement for women's rights. And we continue in a moment.